On June 2, 2015, 22-year-old Morgan Heimer was working as a guide for Tour West, a company leading rafting trips down the Colorado River in the Grand Canyon. He had traveled from his home in Wyoming to join a group of fellow guides for an 8-day trip on the river. Although Morgan was looking forward to the trip, what began as an exciting work excursion soon turned into a haunting mystery when he vanished without a trace. What made his disappearance more shocking is that it seemed to happen in the blink of an eye. June 2nd was the 6th day of Morgan's trip at the Grand Canyon with his tour group and several clients. After rafting down the river for some time that afternoon, they were taking a break near Pumpkin Springs, a well-known stop along the Colorado River. Around 4 p.m., Morgan was talking to the lead guide near a small cliff overlooking the river. A client wanted to speak to the lead guide, so he left the cliff to do so. After a brief conversation with the client, he looked back to where Morgan had been standing and was surprised to see that he was no longer there. As evening approached and Morgan didn't return to camp, the other guides became increasingly concerned. They thoroughly searched the immediate area where he was last seen, but found no sign of him. At 7:26 p.m., the guides contacted the National Park Service to report Morgan missing. Within hours, an extensive search operation conducted by park rangers and various search and rescue teams was underway. They combed the Colorado River near the Pumpkin Springs area and eventually extended the search to Diamond Creek, 12 miles downstream. Despite this exhaustive search that lasted 6 days in total, Morgan was never seen again. Many involved in the search for Morgan Heimer believe that he must have drowned in the Colorado River after falling from the cliff, as this seemed to be the most logical explanation given the lack of evidence. Some, however, found this theory highly improbable. While the Colorado River can be unpredictable, the water in the area where Morgan went missing was relatively calm that day. As an expert swimmer, which he had to be for his job, it was unlikely that he would have drowned under those conditions unless he was somehow knocked unconscious. If such a scenario did occur, however, Morgan was equipped with an Astral personal flotation jacket that should have kept him afloat for a few days, even if he wasn't actively swimming. Furthermore, there was a group of people at Pumpkin Springs when Morgan disappeared. Even if the lead guide did somehow miss him, it's very likely someone else would have seen him. Considering the scope of the search and the miles scoured, many found it implausible that he could have fallen into the river, especially without being noticed. Since the disappearance of Morgan Heimer, several theories have been put forth, ranging from him suffering mental health issues and disappearing of his own accord to him somehow getting lost. No theory has adequately explained the most baffling aspect of the case, however, which is the fact that he vanished in a very short time frame from a busy area during broad daylight. Some believe his disappearance is a clear case of accidental drowning, and he simply wasn't found because he got caught under a branch or rock in the Colorado River. Others believe he may have encountered a more sinister fate, whatever that may have been. On August 18, 2000, 70-year-old Rosemary Kunst was on a group spiritual retreat in California's Klamath National Forest. The previous year, she and her husband Charles were in a serious car accident that ended his life and left her severely injured. This trip was intended to help her recover mentally from her tragic loss. What was supposed to be a healing journey soon turned into a nightmare, however, when Rosemary disappeared under mysterious circumstances. Authorities managed to find only a single trace of her, but it only led to more questions than answers. On the morning of August 17th, Rosemary set off for the Spirit Lake area of the Marble Mountains Wilderness with a group of 20 people. They were part of the Earth Circle organization, led by Native American Kuruk chief and elder Charlie Red Hawk Tom. Each year, Red Hawk conducted several spiritual ceremonies at Spirit Lake, as the land is considered sacred. Rosemary believed that spending time there under Red Hawk's guidance could bring healing to her life, which is why she joined the organization. Upon the group's arrival at their campsite near the lake that morning, they set up tents and other equipment to prepare for their stay. They were scheduled to return on August 19th, but sadly, Rosemary would never make it back with her group. Early on the morning of August 18th, the group began preparing for a long hike, planning to return later in the evening. Rosemary, however, was still tired from the previous day's activities, so she informed Red Hawk that she would not be joining them and stayed behind with the group's cook and Red Hawk's 12-year-old son, who frequently accompanied him on his trips. A few hours after the group left, Rosemary decided to take a short walk by herself along a ridge that overlooks Spirit Lake. Although venturing into the wilderness alone, especially in such a remote area, is generally not advised, the route Rosemary planned to take was considered very safe. The ridge was a one-way route with no easy exits, and the only way off the path would have been by traversing the very steep, brush-covered hillsides, which Rosemary couldn't have managed on her own, even with the necessary equipment. Since there was only one way in and one way out, there was no concern about her getting lost. At around 1 p.m. that day, Rosemary informed the cook of her plan to walk the path along the ridge. He made her a sandwich and gave her some trail mix before she went on her way. Rosemary Kunst would never be seen again. Shortly after the group returned from their hike around 5 p.m., they noticed that Rosemary was missing. Red Hawk asked the cook where she had gone and was informed that she had left for a walk to the lake 4 hours earlier. Red Hawk immediately dispatched a few group members to search for Rosemary, as the trip there and back should have taken no more than an hour and a half. They soon returned, but reported finding absolutely nothing along the route. At this point, Red Hawk led the group back to an area with cell phone reception to alert the local sheriff's office about Rosemary's disappearance. Rescue teams arrived early on August 19th, and the official search for Rosemary began. Over the following week, more than 150 searchers from 3 nearby counties combed every square inch of the Spirit Lake area with the help of National Guard troops and volunteers. The terrain was so rugged and steep that they had to use climbing equipment to reach certain areas. Cadaver dogs and helicopters with thermal imaging cameras were also deployed in an effort to find Rosemary. Searchers were initially hopeful that she would be found, given that she had vanished from a route with only one way in and one way out. Despite the precise location and very thorough searches, however, the only trace of Rosemary they ever discovered was a small clump of 4 hair strands. The hair was found a mile from her last known location, on a rocky and steep part of the hillside she couldn't have possibly accessed on her own, further deepening the mystery. The search continued for a few days after this discovery, concentrating on the area where the hair was found, but nothing else was discovered, and the effort to find Rosemary was eventually called off. The disappearance of Rosemary Kunst left searchers perplexed, as the location where she vanished made conventional explanations seem highly improbable. It was very unlikely that she got lost or simply wandered off the ridge, as there was only one clear path she could have taken, and no other way in or out. It was also unlikely that foul play was involved due to the remoteness of the wilderness surrounding Spirit Lake. There was no one else in the area at that time, except for the group cook and Red Hawk's young son, who both told searchers they were at the camp together the entire time. The clump of Rosemary's hair that was discovered was also very mysterious and only raised more questions. How could her hair have ended up in a spot so difficult to reach that even professional rescue teams needed equipment to get there? The only plausible explanation was that an animal may have dragged her, but this too seemed unlikely given the circumstances. According to Grizz Adams, the incident commander for the sheriff's department handling her case, only a black bear or mountain lion could have dragged Rosemary off the ridge, but there had never been an attack in that particular area before. While this certainly doesn't mean that such a thing couldn't have happened to Rosemary, Grizz was adamant that if she had been ambushed, there would have been more evidence based on other cases he had looked into. Rosemary was wearing a blue baseball cap when she vanished, so if she had been attacked on the ridge and dragged hard enough to leave behind strands of her hair, logic dictates that her hat should have come off as well. She also had a bag with her and was carrying a journal, according to some reports. If she was really dragged by an animal, it is perplexing that searchers managed to find a small clump of hair in such rough terrain, yet were unable to locate any of her other belongings, which should have been far easier to spot. Furthermore, multiple search dogs were brought to the area where the hair was found, but none of them detected Rosemary's scent. To date, no theory can logically explain how a clump of her hair ended up in an area she couldn't have possibly reached on her own, while no other trace of her, not even a scent, was found. On October 2, 1998, 36-year-old Robert Bobo planned to embark on a hunting trip to Rogue River National Forest, which lies between Oregon and California. That afternoon, a friend dropped him off at his campsite in a heavily wooded area just outside Prospect, Oregon. Bob was a longtime resident of Prospect and had visited that particular campsite as well as others in the Rogue River National Forest many times. Over the years, he had become intimately familiar with the area and knew it better than anyone. This made his sudden disappearance all the more bizarre. Early in the morning of October 3rd, Bob's close friend arrived at his camp to pick him up for the start of the hunting season. Strangely, Bob was nowhere to be found, but his belongings, including his favorite baseball cap, 2 rifles, all his clothes, and all his camping gear, were left behind. Bob, not taking anything with him, suggested he didn't intend to be gone for long. He knew when he was supposed to be picked up, however, so his absence at that time was bizarre. Sensing something was wrong, Bob's friend alerted Jackson County State Troopers as well as the National Park Service to his disappearance. Authorities arrived at the campsite shortly after, and a search for Bob immediately began. Dozens of people scoured many miles in the area from morning to night, but no evidence was uncovered. Further searches conducted over the following days also yielded nothing, and eventually, the effort to find Bob was called off. Following the disappearance of Robert Bobo, numerous speculations arose about what might have caused him to abandon his camp. His case was mysterious because his familiarity with the area made common explanations, like getting lost, unlikely. One theory, suggested by Jackson County Detective Dan Hobbs, was that Bob may have left to scout out a better campsite for the night, but became injured or suffered a medical emergency, rendering him unable to return. One notable factor that contradicts this theory, however, was the last sighting of Bob. During the search for him, 2 local hunters came forward to report that they had seen Bob still at his campsite while driving by at around 9 p.m. on October 2nd. It was already pitch dark at that time, which would have made it significantly more difficult to set up camp elsewhere. Therefore, it is highly unlikely that Bob would have chosen to relocate at night unless something happened at his camp. But there was no indication that anything was wrong at his camp, and the fact that he didn't take anything with him also goes against the idea that he willingly left. Bob was an avid hunter and woodsman, so the thought that he left his camp with nothing on him, in complete darkness, makes no logical sense. Many speculated that Bob left everything behind because something caught him by surprise at his campsite, preventing him from taking anything with him. One possible theory was that he fell victim to an animal attack, as the Rogue River National Forest is home to many predators, such as cougars and black bears. While certainly plausible in such a scenario, there was no evidence to suggest an animal attack took place. There wasn't a drop of blood anywhere near his campsite, nor any clothing fibers in the area. There likely would have been at least some sign of a physical struggle if he was attacked, but his campsite was pristine. As such, some believe that something far more nefarious happened to Bob. From the very first day Robert Bobo was reported missing, his brother Dennis Bobo was convinced that something sinister happened to him. The fact that Bob's favorite hat was left behind was all the proof Dennis needed to believe that his brother was the victim of foul play. According to Dennis, Bob was extremely self-conscious about his receding hairline, so he never went anywhere without his black Pepe Cat baseball cap. Dennis stated that Bob would have definitely worn the hat around the campsite, even at night, due to his insecurity. While this may sound trivial to some, Dennis was absolutely adamant that Bob would not have left without the cap. He claimed that Bob would even put the hat on in the morning before he went to the bathroom and would only take it off to sleep. This led to speculation that something may have happened to Bob when he was sleeping or about to go to sleep, or perhaps when he briefly stepped out of his tent at night to relieve himself nearby. If he wouldn't have gone anywhere without his hat, it stands to reason that something may have happened to him close to his campsite. There was absolutely no evidence of a struggle, and the campsite was left completely undisturbed, however, making it difficult to imagine what kind of scenario may have transpired. In a news interview after Robert Bobo's disappearance, Dennis Bobo insisted that he was almost certain his brother was a victim of foul play. Dennis was unhappy with the Jackson County Sheriff's Department, believing they dismissed the possibility that Bob may have been harmed far too easily. He stated, quote, "There's no evidence of foul play, as they consider it, but put two and two together. Where is he if there's no foul play?" Dennis found it hard to imagine that Bob left no trace if he had truly suffered a medical emergency, become injured, or fallen victim to an animal attack, as authorities speculated. The complete lack of any clues about what Bob may have done between 9 p.m. on October 2nd and early the next morning when he was discovered missing makes his case extremely bizarre. This lack of evidence led many to speculate that Bob may have fallen victim to an accident authorities couldn't account for, such as being unintentionally shot by another hunter who subsequently drove him out of the area. Other theories have been proposed, but with no evidence, everything remains mere speculation. Although we may never know what happened to Robert Bobo, some believe whatever happened to him must have been so sudden that he never had a chance to react.